With the release of Pokemon Sword and Shield right around the corner as the very first mainline series Pokemon games on a home console, I felt it was only right to make my next Game Changers episode to be about the two games that started it all. Welcome to a brand new Best Life Gaming episode of Game Changers. In this series, I reflect on past games and their impact on the gaming world. Today's episode is all about Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue, two games that quite literally spawned an empire and changed the way we all viewed handheld gaming. From introducing the world to a property that has permeated all forms of media from shows, movies, spin-off comics, and spin-off video games. A franchise that alone rivals even the most successful gaming juggernauts that have ever existed. Pokemon has touched so many lives from past, present, and probably will continue to do so into the future, tying generations of gamers together through multiple decades. In this episode, I will give you my thoughts and opinions on why these games were a massive success and how their lasting impact is still felt to this day. Aside from the legendary Tetris, Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue are the second best-selling titles ever on the original Game Boy. Simply nothing like it had ever been seen before on a handheld device. To put that into perspective, today in 2019, with a Nintendo Switch essentially being in a huge majority of homes by now, we've grown beyond accustomed to having top-notch games in the palms of our hands. But if you were a kid like me in the 90s, handheld gaming was a huge novelty in general. Nintendo's Game Boy was not a common sight, and if you owned one, all games were in black and white. If you were one of the lucky few at the time that owned one, the options weren't, well, that great. I remember when I got my first Game Boy, I marched into Toys R Us with my allowance and purchased Super Mario Land. But only to find out it was hugely disappointing compared to the Mario games that I had on my home console. Most really just played Game Boy to pass the time, went away from home, but once Pokemon arrived, that changed everything. I remember it started for me with one or two kids in my 4th grade class who out of nowhere owned this game with this eye-catching creatures who you could acquire. Everyone was curious about it, watching over their shoulders and asking questions. It wasn't long before everyone was parading into class with a Game Boy, loaded with red or blue, and an ear-to-ear grin on their faces. Soon, playing your Game Boy trumped everything else, including your home console. But if you think about what Pokemon essentially is, you realize why it caught on in such a unique way. Not to get too scientific, but there's no doubt that two things that all humans love are being surprised and rewarded. What Pokemon did was tap into those deep psychological instincts and did it in an approachable yet satisfying manner. A game simply about attaining a bunch of creatively designed creatures, all with elemental abilities, and essentially receiving rewards for pitting them in battle against others proved to be a formula for success. The main goal of the game was to traverse a relatively large region called Kanto, based on an actual region in Japan. Battle your way through a story to eventually become the most powerful trainer in the world. This was something that just didn't exist anywhere, let alone on a handheld. To boot, you were a kid who was out in the world on your own, essentially being an adult. The way you became number one was by catching and leveling up Pokemon while proving yourself in battle against 8 gym leaders scattered all through the region. Each harder than the last, you would earn a badge for finally defeating them in battle. Finally, at the end, you would face off against the Elite Four, who were the toughest trainers, eventually to take your rightful place at the top. In the beginning, you would wake up in the small town of Pallet Town, where your friend Professor Oak would give you your first Pokemon, and a device called a Pokédex, which was essentially an empty codex of sorts, meant to be filled up by catching different Pokemon. To catch Pokemon, you simply needed to find them in the wild, weaken them and lower their health bar, and then toss a circular capsule called a Pokeball at them, in hopes that they would be captured. But in the beginning, you would choose between 3 now iconic Pokemon: Bulbasaur, Squirtle, or Charmander. Seeing as you would need another Game Boy, a game, and a link cable to ever have all 3, picking your starter was almost like choosing a team. Everyone thought that their choice was the right one, and your rival, a fellow trainer like you, would choose whatever Pokemon had your type advantage. He would show up throughout the game to challenge you and always seem to be just a little bit further along than you are. He also, spoiler, is the final trainer that you would face after the Elite Four. The gameplay all hinged on something we all referred to as type advantage. This is the DNA of what and still is of all Pokemon games. Simply each Pokemon's elemental type would give them an advantage over certain types, while also being weak to others. Like for instance, a fire-type Pokemon could deal extra damage to a grass Pokemon, while a water type could deal extra damage to a fire type. Each battle was turn-based, and the gist was to put the right Pokemon into the fight to succeed, and the game would reward those with the best knowledge of type matchups. As you used your Pokemon in battle, they would gain experience to level up, eventually learning stronger moves. This made it super addicting to use your favorite ones, hoping for the next devastating attack to unlock. Also, another undoubtedly crucial feature was most Pokemon having the ability to evolve, sometimes multiple times. Whether through leveling up, using an evolutionary stone, or trading, most Pokemon had the ability to go through a metamorphosis. This made catching and training Pokemon even more exciting because of the promise of eventually getting another creature much cooler and more powerful than its current form. That feature, plus a story that could take over 40 hours to beat, including the objective of catching them, all after was absolutely insane for any game, especially a Game Boy game. Not to mention, 151 Pokemon in both games made for a vast variety of options, making everyone's team fairly unique and giving people a sense of individuality. The impact of Pokemon was very evident soon. Everyone had this game and wanted to battle and trade and clear their Pokédex. Rumors began to circulate, certain Pokemon that didn't actually exist said to be in the game. Game Shark codes exploiting famous glitches led to players exceeding the level cap of 100. This game honestly became a subculture. The cartoon became a smash hit. Every kid at the time was waking up Saturday morning to see what Ash Ketchum, the star of the show, was up to next on his Pokemon quest. It just seemed like Pokemon was the only thing on everyone's mind. The Pokemon card game became enormously popular and was itself a major spectacle. I can tell you that Game Boys became a must-have. From the Pocket, the eventual Color, and all subsequent versions, Pokemon was always the game that drove me and many others to own one. Nearly over 20 years have passed, and I can vividly remember all the places I was when I played Pokemon Blue for the first time. I will never forget picking Bulbasaur, and it was because everyone told me he was the lamest choice, and grinding to level 16 because I could not wait to see what its evolution looked like. There are very few games, especially from that far back, that I can say that about. I think most, if not all of us who were around back then can agree. From a card game still played today, to a show that still runs today, to one of the most successful Nintendo gaming properties with annual releases, there's no doubt that Pokemon Red and Blue defined a generation and left a lasting impact. You'd even have to wonder if the Game Boy in general would have been as successful as it was. So on November 15th, when you crack open Sword and Shield like I'll be doing, I want you to remember all the entries that started it all. The fact that we were all dying for a console version of this game even back then. A property that is a game changer in every sense of the word. So now I ask you, what was your first Pokemon game? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed my video, help my channel grow by leaving a like and subscribe. If you want to be notified of future content, then go ahead and ring those bells. This has been a Best Life Gaming episode of Game Changers. Thank you for watching, and I hope all of you out there are living your best life.